One night, out of boredom, Miroku silently snuck up on his dog demon friend who was sleeping in a tree and shouted, "Sit, boy!" Inuyasha jerked awake, lost his balance, and plummeted face first into the ground. The monk stared, wondering for a moment if it had actually worked, but quickly decided to believe it was merely a coincidence. Besides, it was embarrassing enough for the poor guy that Kagome could take him down with a single word. It would hardly be fair for two people to have that much power over him, though the thought still brought a small smile to Miroku's lips. "What you smiling about, you jerk?" came Inuyasha's groggy, irritated voice. The monk gave his friend a kind smile. "Nothing that would interest you, my friend," replied Miroku, offering his hand to the half-demon in apology, who just stared at it before finally accepting the help. "Thanks," grunted Inuyasha, wiping the dirt from his clothes. Just then, the clouds parted to reveal a fully formed moon, and as its glow caressed the silver strands of his hair, making them gleam and sparkle, Miroku found himself suddenly entranced by a beauty he had never noticed before in his half-demon companion. He was startled by the effect it was having on him. His heart sped up a fraction as he blushed in spite of himself. What was this odd sensation welling up inside him? It wasn't possible that he was feeling attracted to his male friend. Was it? Several yards away, Kagome turned over in her sleep and mumbled, "Inuyasha?" causing both Miroku and Inuyasha to go rigid and then, "Sit, boy." This time when the half-demon hit the ground, he noticed it was softer than usual, and then he heard someone groaning from underneath him. That's when he realized that he was sprawled across Miroku, who seemed just as startled by this as he was. For some reason, however, he couldn't seem to look away, much less move off of him, for in the next moment, something else gleamed in the monk's eyes that had him wondering if Miroku had maybe hit his head. He started to ask him if he was okay when the monk slowly sat himself up, rubbing the back of his head, saying, "You know, I've never really appreciated the brutal power behind that command until just now." Miroku hissed in slight pain from the movement, which had Inuyasha worried in spite of himself. He leapt off the monk's legs and crouched next to him. Even with being half-demon, Inuyasha would still occasionally come out of a sick command a little injured and fairly dazed. He could only imagine the effect it would have on a human body. He narrowed his eyes in concern at the slightly dazed monk and said, "You know, maybe you should lie back down. If you hit your head, you might have a concussion." Trying to sound impartial, though he was pretty sure he came off sounding panicked instead. Miroku blinked and stared at him before finally giving a small smile and saying, "Careful, Inuyasha. I might start thinking you like me." Inuyasha wasn't really sure how to reply to that, and had to quickly look away to recompose his expression. Did he like him? And what exactly was his friend implying by like? Did he mean as more than a friend? When he looked back, he found Miroku staring at him in confused concern. This caused him to blush, and the monk, apparently amused, chuckled softly and said, "Relax, Inuyasha, I was just kidding," and then turned away before mumbling, "Mostly." Inuyasha was pretty sure he wasn't supposed to have heard that last part, but he had. So his ears drooped as he racked his brain for an explanation for the sudden, distant look that now gleamed in Miroku's eyes, and also for why his own heart was suddenly racing from the sudden need to know if it was because his friend secretly liked him. A gentle breeze rushed around them, filling his senses with the scent of his friend. He had never noticed before just how pleasant it was. Not at all musky like most men. Not that he went around randomly sniffing at men, mind you. Inuyasha relaxed into a more comfortable position, and maybe it had something to do with their current serene surroundings, but there was something strangely calming about being surrounded by him. He breathed in again, noticing a soft combination of sage and something sweet that he couldn't quite place, and then something that was purely Miroku. When Inuyasha glanced back at the monk, he frowned when he saw the now troubled look gleaming in his friend's eyes. This bothered him more than he cared to admit. "Hey," he said softly, and waited for Miroku to look back at him.
Is there something you want to tell me?
Miroku opened his mouth to speak, but stopped himself before looking away again with a heavy sigh. By now, Inuyasha would normally have been shaking him until he got the information out of him. But this time he believed something less violent would be more effective. He gently placed his hand on the monk's shoulder and whispered,
It's okay. Whatever it is, I promise not to clobber ya.
Miroku sighed and then gently removed Inuyasha's hand from his shoulder. But Inuyasha wasn't about to give up that easily. Not when the suspense from not knowing now had his heart pounding a bruise into his ribs. He sighed and said softly,
Look, you're obviously bothered by something, so why don't you just tell me what it is so that I can finally put your mind at ease?
Miroku, finally gracing the half-demon with his nervous gaze, gave him an uneasy smile and said,
I really don't think you want to hear about my problem.
Inuyasha was beginning to lose his patience. He groaned and said just above a whisper,
I just told you that I did, so why can't you just trust that I'm trying to be your friend?
Miroku, quite alarmed by the level of concern in his companion's voice for the first time being used on him, could only stare in dumbfounded silence at the powerful gaze now directed at him. He had never noticed before just how entrancing those golden orbs were when focused on someone in worry, though that was probably because Inuyasha had never looked at him like this before. The monk swallowed and took a deep breath before finally replying,
Fine.
Rising to his feet, pulling Inuyasha up with him,
but not here.
After about 30 minutes of following Miroku deeper into the world of swaying branches and cricket song, Inuyasha became more convinced of what he was bringing him out here to say. Finally, the monk stopped near a small pond that was glowing with the light of hundreds of fireflies. The sight of Miroku right in the middle of it all had him staring in awe before he forced himself to look away and say a little nervously,
Well, we're here, so tell me what's on your mind.
Miroku slowly turned around, saying,
Now remember, you promised you wouldn't hit me.
Inuyasha blinked at him.
Hit him? Why would he think I would?
Then, remembering all the times he had clobbered him, he grimaced inwardly and gave him a reassuring nod and said,
I won't. Honest.
The monk sighed deeply, and then giving the half-demon a somewhat uneasy smile, said,
Inuyasha, I like you.
Startled by the sudden relief that swept through him by this simple statement, he couldn't seem to stop the grin spreading into his lips. He couldn't believe how powerful of an effect those 3 simple words were having on him, but he decided not to question it and simply said,
I like you too.
He was surprised that he wasn't surprised at all to find that he really did, strongly. More strongly than he could remember ever feeling for anyone after Kikyo. Miroku, unaware of Inuyasha's realization, seemed quite frustrated as he said,
No, I mean, I think I know,
said Inuyasha, slowly walking towards him.
You do?
Said Miroku, somewhat alarmed. The half-demon smiled in adoration.
I do.
He purred, lacing his fingers through the monk's hair, and gently pulled him in for an unexpected kiss that slowed the erratic beating of his heart. Miroku was startled, and was finding it hard to believe at first what was happening. But when Inuyasha didn't pull away to basically tell him was all a joke, and instead was moving his hands intimately down his back to pull him closer, Miroku finally relaxed and closed his eyes, and then slowly deepened the kiss, and suddenly they were swept away by more passion than either of them had expected. When they finally came back up for air, Miroku on his back with Inuyasha breathing heavily on top of him, somehow they ended up on the ground. The half-demon smirked at his more-than friend and said,
There now, aren't you glad you trusted me?
Miroku gazed at his more-than friend and chuckled softly. He gently cupped Inuyasha's cheek and whispered,
I'll never doubt you again.
before pulling him back down for another rewarding moment of passion.